Um, yeah, so next up, I'm really pleased. I think Paul is online. Hopefully, maybe they can confirm that
Yeah.
in the AV box. Yeah. So I'm really pleased next up to welcome our second keynote. So Paul's the furthest ever keynote we've had in the head. He's joining us from Queensland in Australia, where it's I believe it's currently about 9:30, and it's Paul's going to give us a short keynote today. So Paul's a leading scholar and advocate in disability rights. He's known internationally for his work on equality, inclusive education and the law, and he's drawing on his own experience in human rights policy and lived experience. Within this keynote, he's going to explore how institutions can move beyond compliance towards meaningful inclusion. And I suppose the reason that Paul himself is with us today is really what caught our eye here in the head was the fantastic work he did chairing a subcommittee of the U21 group. If you don't know what the U21 group, it's a global network of 21 universities who joined together to sort of advance different agendas. And in this case, they looked at the disability inclusion agenda, and the U21 report on disability inclusion, I would really highly recommend it. It's one of the more impressive reports I've seen in the international context, and it highlights challenges and good practice and a road ahead, which really talks quite a lot about the governance of disability inclusion and recommends universal design again as a key kind of enabler of disability inclusion. We know it's an enabler of inclusion of cohorts much wider than that, but this report focused specifically on that. So, Paul, can you hear us?
I can hear you
Stage?
loudly and clearly.
Hi, Paul. How's it going? It's Dara here
Oh,
from Ahead.
amazing.
Can you hear us? Okay,
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
we can hear you clear as a bell. So take it away, Paul.
Perfect. I'll do just that. Thank you very much. And for that kind introduction. I believe we are in the middle of changing the world for the better. Did you know at the equator, Earth rotates at about 1,670 kilometers per hour? I reckon the pace of change right now is even faster. One area where I'm really excited to see this change is in terms of universal design. I believe strongly that it is time for the universally designed tertiary education sector. Across higher education, the increasing student numbers, the numbers of students with disabilities, plus other pressures on our staff and our system, is illustrating the failure of ad hoc, retrospective, reasonable adjustment, reasonable accommodation approaches. Those reasonable accommodation models fail to provide real equality. They are also hugely expensive, both for the students who have to endure them and staff who have to implement them, but also institutions who have to pay for them. In Australia, where I am, our so the population of our students with disabilities. So 12.3% of our entire student population report having some disability. So that's not all the students. There's less students that ask for help, but that's the numbers of students. And with about 1.6 million students, we have around 196,000 students reporting having some disability. So that includes psychosocial, neurodiversity, blindness. I'm totally blind, by the way. Guide dogs asleep. Anyway, but it is time for a change. Now, this change, I believe, has to start with universal design, and working across our institutions is the way to do this. That's why I was really thrilled to get the chance to talk with a group who's leading globally in how we can collaborate to create inclusive excellence. To illustrate, and to also illustrate the benefits of collaborations, I want to talk a little bit now on a report which we've heard just about there, the U21 network, which started with, I think it keeps changing numbers, but now they've got 30 universities, could even be up. But in 2024, I managed to get myself commissioned by the U21 Senior Leadership Group to draft this report. I worked with a bunch of my colleagues across the network, and so there's about 100 contributors, about 36 authors, I think, 34 maybe. And there were parts in that report. One part dealt with governance, overall disability governance. another with research, another one staff, students, and on services. That's part had the built environment, ITS, and libraries. So I'm going to focus a bit on one chapter. That was the joy I was privileged to write with a couple of colleagues, a couple from my university, University of Queensland, importantly from professional area and from the academic area. I love collaborating across that. Another colleague from University of Maryland, and one from University Gadjah Mada, which I hope I pronounced correct. That's in Indonesia. So this chapter focused on universal design. It called for a new approach, and we drew a lot from Ireland here. As you guys are really lucky, you live in a country where universal design is required. Um, so it's not, as you know, no law is perfect. But it's because it's not just law that changes its cost. It's a factor. When I talk about senior leadership, cost is a factor. So, and I'm looking at, I think about 4% of your student population used to have was reporting a disability. And in 2022, I think that 7.4%. And I think now it's 2025, I think it's 8.7%. So getting around doubling, actually I think a bit more. Math isn't my strong suit. So if you think about considering none of us have got extra staff in our departments, and so I think in Ireland that would be about 24,000 students, which is a university all of its own. So with this student cohort, it's expensive to treat inclusion as an afterthought. In Australia, I'm coming back here because I've been doing a lot of working about a law reform agenda, which we'll pitch to the minister next week, actually. Now, one of the reports I was reading was written by the senior leadership at a major university. So this is the senior leaders, and they were looking just at a cost factor. So there was rooms that were permanently being assigned to students around about exams, and some of the questions were being asked there, not because of it's right or anything. It's just simply, is there a way we can design this in a way that doesn't require huge amounts of adjustments? And I'm really shouting in my room, yes, it's called universal design, you bloody idiots. Of course, I wouldn't have told any leaders that, but literally they were coming to the same conclusion, which is really exciting. But we all have trouble. And I mean, so yeah, I'm reasonably well positioned. I work with our federal education minister, I work with senior leaders, disability scholar. So I shouldn't have any problems, right? Full professor, lawyer. Well, I still have crap. I mean, sorry, it's just bad stuff, bad smell, sorry. Um, so I was given this table in an Excel spreadsheet, and I said, "Oh, look, I can't read this. Can I get that in a more accessible format?" And no, you can read it. All you have to do, and they started explaining it to me. And this is an email. So I sent back, look, yeah, it's not going to work for this reason. Could you just tell me this figure? And then they, backwards and forwards, they then sent me a Word file of it. And guess what? The graphic just went to Word. So I still couldn't read it. Anyway, so I ended up using AI, which was actually pretty reasonable, and asking a friend to help me out. So that wasn't inclusive, and it was an absolute frustration. And and that made me think, if I get that, what does our students get? What would a student have where, yeah, it's not fair, especially for students who don't have the resources that I have. So what we need to do is we need to really embrace universal design. So the people will say, oh, and I have heard this say we're proposing it now for our laws. Oh, but no one really understands what it means. Where's the definition? And I just went, yeah. Have you looked at Article 2 of the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities? It talks about it, inclusion as far as possible without reasonable adaptation, etc. So I just gave them that definition, and um, that that was a good starting point. Obviously, that doesn't get you very far in terms of practical things, but as you know, Altitude's got some really good template, good information cast. So there's a lot of and web accessibility. So there's a lot of other details out there. So It is U21. I really was wondering how we would adopt universal design in this network. So we Dublin's one of our members, and obviously you guys have universal design, so they had a lot written. Say McMaster as well from Canada. They have a they had a statement that where universal design is appropriate is properly implemented, it removes persons with disabilities from the burden from unnecessary and burdensome obligations and uh, programs. So that was really Canada does have positive duties. Waseda, interesting, that's in Japan. They talked about that providing proactive recruitment, removing of barriers is necessary. And also they talked about universal design and barrier-free designs, which I thought was really interesting. Not sure how it is implemented because most of it was in Japanese, but their English pages looked pretty good. Now, another member is our University of Zurich, where it talked about they wanted to embrace universal design there as well. And in Australia, coming back down under, University of Melbourne is that they talk about how UDL, Universal Design Learning, can get access to a curriculum. There's a lot of big statements. And then we're really universities are quite good about great big bold statements. We're good at them. And then we started to look at how do they actually implement that. Lund had some things in Hong Kong, and University of Queensland had resources that were on the websites. Um, but I mean, there's always going to be the challenge, of course, with academics not having the time to really get something done. We need top down, bottom up approaches. At the University of Queensland, I mean, I work at my university, so I love my university. But one thing I think we do have that's is really useful is a university-wide plan, a disability action plan that aims to develop and measures across the university. It's lodged with our Human Rights Commission, and it includes in there access to digital environments, inclusive education, and anticipates needs. So it has a lot of objectives in there that underpin universal design. So there's a commitment that takes away from the individual more to the system. And we have resources put at that and measures a digital inclusion project, for example, where we have a number of IT people trying to find issues and trying to remove them. And that's led by ITS. It's helping. It's quite hard. We have people in the teaching space around curriculum. Our library has a full-time accessibility expert, and I think that's really important because it's actually a practical way when people have an issue, they don't have to go somewhere. And I note them because in Australia, none of that's law required, so it's all voluntary. And one of the things I'm really happy about as a researcher is that we have a commitment in our action plan to develop a research and innovation plan. So we've done that. We've adopted a disability inclusion research and innovation plan. Now now it's pretty rare. It may even be unique, but it's a university-wide plan to shift our our research and innovation system. So we want to make ourselves more inclusive and our communities. And what's really, I think, powerful in this is that we harness our research powerhouse, our academics, our professional staff. So using our researchers to improve ourselves and improve society. And I think it only started really about 6 months ago. Um, we only started with about 30 or 40 people, but so when we University of Queensland UQ Disability Collaboratory, we started. I've been directing it. As I said, what 2024, we had about 30 or 40 people. 2025 is when we really started. Now we have around just over 400 staff, like 400 staff across the university who want to do something on disability. You could be surprised there's that many researchers. Well, I've got to tell you, a lot of people with disabilities join who want to put their own lived experience in. And, but it's also not just being tokenistic because we had a really successful first 6 months, and then our associate dean's research liked what we were doing and put together a seed funding plan. And so these were announced in 6 projects, all got about 20 grand each. And support from our major initiatives. And so one of those is around one of the projects is around universal design. But anyway, it's a really interesting, I think using your researchers is really helpful. Now, I think I'll just want to finish up with by saying to really make change happen, and what we've done is we need to collaborate across our universities, use our own expertise, so like the Altitude Charter and others, to co-design with students and staff to make sure it's relevant to that institution, so local needs. And we also need to get the support from leadership and because measuring what we're doing, rewarding what we're doing, and also sanctioning. And I really push sanctioning because the regulatory pyramid, say if you look at work health and safety laws, it has punishment. And so what do you do when staff decide to not do, they get told by the experts who know what they're doing, well, the student needs extra time, and instead of doing the extra time, let's say, as I just heard, they walk out of the room. Or we get that they turn the microphones off, or they quiz the student. Do you really need it? Well, I think we need to hold the institution needs to hold those people to account, and so does the regulator. So, so how do you do this? How do you get all this change? Let's go back to where I started. Let's talk about the numbers. Numbers. We've got a lot of people. Think about the numbers. Oops, sorry, bumped that. If you think about the numbers of people we've got in our sector that have disabilities, the number of let's think about their families. So you've got, say, 20 odd thousand students. Let's go, everyone's got parents or family or siblings and friends. So let's just stretch it out to 300,000 people. Could you imagine how that impacts on a politician if that many people all start reaching out and going, can you please make sure this happens at this university? Can you please make sure that happens? And what about if you reach out globally and get pressure? Because I can tell you, it makes a difference. So I was privileged to serve the Minister for Education down under in Australia, on the Universities Accord, and I saw how a lot of people acted and how it went. And I then was appointed to the Higher Education Standards Panel, where we're now drafting reforms for to go forward to hopefully one of them will be universal design if we can get the minister to sign that. Well, but I mean, in doing that, it's noticing just how important it is to get people to write in and to push. I was quite active, and we managed to get, I can't really say the figures, but there was a lot of people from around the world and locally who have contributed in academia, but also mums and dads. So if you want to really get change, in your room, you've got a lot of great people, but if your leadership, your politicians are used to hearing from you to some extent, how about you try and get some students to be active? And if you're not allowed to talk to your own students like that, well, maybe you should reach out to other students at other universities, not just universities, of course, take in vet, because when we all come together and start demanding change, the numbers we have, we talk about 16% of the population, that's enough to tip an election. And then if we're prepared to fight for it, we'll get actually some action, and we really will change the world for the better. Not just change the life of one student, 20 students, 1,000 students, but change hundreds of thousands of students and create opportunities where otherwise they wouldn't have those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was absolutely brilliant, and I suppose the key message I'm taking away here is it's a powerful reminder that our individual efforts in the classroom, in our professional services across our institutions, they connect to the strategic level of our institutions and the power and energy that we're putting there. They connect to the national stakeholders like SUDS and HEA and DeFerris, and they connect to a much wider global movement. And it kind of takes all of those things, pushing and pulling each other in the right direction. So I really thank you for that global overview, Paul. We're a bit short on time, so I think we're going to jump to the break, but I want to thank you, especially because it's so late in the evening there, for joining us. Have a lovely evening with yourself and your family, and including the guide dog, and we hope to see
Thank
you
you.
again. And by the way, thank you for apologising for saying crap, which if I can guarantee you, this is an Irish audience, so there'll be 10 times worse said over coffee in a
That's
few
right.
minutes.
All right,
Thank you, Paul. Cheers.
Cheers, my friend. Bye now. Bye.